Have you ever imagined spending your whole life building something, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, only for the very person you built it for to take it all away in a single night? Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to pour decades of love into raising a child, only to have that child look you in the eye someday and say words so cruel, so cold, that they don't just break your heart, they take the ground out from beneath your feet? And have you ever feared, quietly, painfully, in the back of your mind, that as you grow older, the world might decide you're no longer needed, no longer valuable, no longer worth protecting? These fears aren't often spoken aloud, but they live inside many of us as we age, hidden beneath polite smiles and brave faces. And those fears came roaring to life the moment she heard her son say the unthinkable. "I'm getting married tomorrow. I sold your car and the house. I'm leaving, goodbye." Just like that, blunt, emotionless, final, words delivered with the softness of a punch to the chest. Words that shattered something inside her that had already been fragile from years of loneliness. She stood there, the hallway lights flickering above her, holding a basket of freshly folded laundry she'd been preparing for him, and for a few seconds she genuinely thought she had misheard him. Because no son speaks like that, not a son you raised with gentle hands and endless sacrifices, not a son who once clung to your leg crying because he didn't want you out of his sight, not a son who kissed your forehead every birthday. So she blinked and whispered, "What did you say?" hoping he would soften, hoping he would smile and say it was a joke, hoping she had imagined the tremor in his voice, the distant look in his eyes. But instead he repeated it with even less emotion. "I sold your car. I sold the house. I'm leaving tonight." Her hands trembled, the basket slipping from her grip, towels tumbling to the floor like pieces of her life falling apart. She stared at him, trying to find the boy she once knew in the young man standing in front of her. But his face was tight, strained, as if he was fighting something within himself. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He kept glancing toward the door. And in that instant, a frightening thought crossed her mind. This wasn't just cruelty. Something else was going on, something bigger, darker, but still, the shock punched through her first, leaving her voice broken. You sold my house. The house your father and I built, the only place I have." She said it with disbelief, not anger, because anger hadn't even reached her yet. No, what reached her first was fear. Pure, cold, paralyzing fear. What happens to a woman her age when she has no home? Where does she go? Who takes her in? How does she start again when the world moves faster than her knees, her excuses, her endurance, her pride? Everything trembled inside her like thin glass. Why would you do this to me?" she asked, her voice rising into something sharp, something desperate, but he didn't answer. Instead, his jaw tightened, his fists clenched, and he whispered, "I don't have time to explain." Those words stabbed deeper than the rest. No time to explain, no time to reassure her, no time to soften the blow. What was so urgent that he would rip her life apart in the middle of the night? She felt her heart thumping painfully against her ribs, a heavy, irregular rhythm only fear can create. She stepped toward him, her voice trembling, her hands shaking not from age but from the terror of losing everything. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I don't understand. How will I live? Where will I go? Why are you doing this?" She felt the deepest insecurity of growing older swirl up inside her, the fear of being abandoned, of becoming a burden, of losing her independence, her dignity, her safety. And for the first time in years, she felt small, so small, like a shadow inside her own home. He squeezed his eyes shut as if her pain was a blow to his conscience. For a second, just a short, fleeting second, she saw guilt flicker across his face. A guilt so raw it felt like a crack in his armor. But then, just as quickly, he swallowed it down, turned away, grabbed a duffel bag she hadn't noticed sitting by the door and said, "I'm sorry, Mom, it's done." "I have to go." Her chest tightened. He wasn't just leaving, he was running. From what? From whom? She watched him reach for the doorknob, and panic surged through her so fast she felt her knees trembling. Without thinking, she grabbed his arm. "Look at me," she pleaded. "Please, look at me and tell me why." Her voice broke on the last word. He finally turned, and for the first time she saw something terrifying in his eyes, fear. not of her, not of guilt, but something else. Something outside this house, something waiting for him, something he didn't dare disobey. She recoiled slightly, her mind racing. Was someone threatening him, forcing him, manipulating him? Was the bride involved? Was he in danger? Her shock transformed into dread as she noticed how pale he looked, how badly his hands shook when he picked up his keys. This wasn't a boy eager to start a new life. This was someone cornered. And suddenly her pain took on a new shape, not just heartbreak but suspicion. Her instincts screamed at her that the truth was nowhere near as simple as a son abandoning his mother. Something or someone was controlling this moment. And she knew, with the certainty only a mother can feel, that the story he just told her was a lie, or only a piece of a much darker truth. As he opened the door and whispered goodbye, she felt a fire ignite in her chest, not rage, not revenge, but resolve. If he thought she would simply fade quietly into the ruins of her life, he didn't know her at all, because she wasn't just losing a house. She was losing her child. And she wasn't going to let him vanish into the night without discovering the truth behind the coldest words he had ever spoken. The real story behind his goodbye was just beginning. She stood in the dim hallway long after the door closed behind her son, staring at the empty space he had just walked through as if it might somehow explain everything he refused to say. The silence he left behind felt heavier than any words could have been, thick, suffocating, the kind that wraps around your chest until breathing turns into a conscious effort. Her home, once warm with the sounds of his footsteps, his laughter, even his occasional frustration, now felt like nothing more than an empty shell. She looked around at the framed photographs lining the walls, memories she had treasured, moments she had preserved with care, and she wondered how the same boy she held in every one of those pictures could stand in front of her tonight and strip away her life with a few rushed sentences. She sank slowly to her knees, clutching the laundry basket as though it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing completely. Her heart throbbed with betrayal, but beneath that betrayal lay something far more fragile. The fear that she had somehow failed him, failed as a mother, failed as his only supporter, failed as the person he should have trusted more than anyone. What did I do wrong? The question repeated in her mind like a cruel echo. She had spent years worrying about becoming a burden, years fearing the day he would no longer need her, years wondering how life would change when he built a new family of his own. But she never imagined he would leave her like this, with no home, no car, no explanation, and no sense of where she belonged anymore. As she pushed herself back onto her feet, her legs trembling beneath her, she felt the walls tilt slightly around her. She had lived in this house for decades. She and her late husband had painted these rooms together, repaired the roof after storms, built a life inside these walls. And now, with one blunt announcement, she wasn't sure if she still had a right to stand here at all. She walked slowly into the living room, her hands trailing along the back of the sofa as if anchoring herself to the space. The wedding invitation sat on the coffee table, elegant, white, edged in gold. She had tucked it into a small frame earlier that day, proud of her son's new beginning. Now, seeing it made her stomach twist painfully. If he was truly getting married tomorrow, why would he not want her there? Why had he not shared any details? Why had his voice sounded more like dread than excitement? These questions piled up inside her until her head pulsed. She picked up the invitation gently, running her thumb over his name, remembering the day she gave birth to him, the way he cried until she placed him against her chest. How could the same child grow into a man cold enough to say goodbye as if she were a stranger on a bus instead of his only family? She lowered herself into the couch, her breath unsteady. Her hands shook as she tried to gather her thoughts, but the more she tried to make sense of his words, the less sense they made. "I sold your car." She felt her heart drop again. That car was the last thing she had of her freedom, her independence. She'd taken pride in still being able to run errands, visit the market, drive to her doctor's appointments without asking for help. Losing the house was a crushing blow. Losing the car was a stripping away of her dignity. And he said it without even offering her an alternative, without offering her safety, shelter, or the slightest consideration. But what echoed louder than both losses was the sound of his voice, strained, shaky, hollow. He wasn't cold by nature. She knew him too well. Something had twisted him into a corner where he thought this was the only choice. And the way he couldn't meet her eyes, that alone screamed the truth she was slowly beginning to sense. This wasn't just betrayal, it was fear. Her mind jumped to possibilities she didn't want to consider. Had he fallen into debt? Was someone threatening him? Was he involved with people who demanded money, obedience, loyalty, people who wouldn't hesitate to use her as leverage? She shivered at the thought. Or maybe the bride's family had pressured him, demanded that he sever ties with her to start fresh, to clean his slate, to appear independent. Some families could be cruel in ways that didn't even feel cruel to them. Or maybe the bride herself didn't want an old mother in the picture. She swallowed hard, her insecurities rushing through her like cold wind. Was she too old, too clingy, too poor, too unimportant? She tried to shake the thoughts away, but the pain in her chest only deepened. She remembered the times she'd seen couples argue about in-laws, about aging parents, about obligations. Had she become a burden without noticing it? Had she overstayed her place in his life simply by existing? She touched the framed picture of her wedding with her late husband, his smile wide, his shoulders broad, his eyes filled with a steady love she still missed every night. If he were alive, would any of this be happening? Would their son have made choices driven by fear or desperation? She felt tears fill her eyes, spilling down her cheeks in quiet, hopeless streams. She wiped them away, but they kept coming, fueled by heartbreak, confusion, and the terrible, suffocating thought that she was losing the last person she had left in the world. She pressed a hand over her chest as though trying to hold herself together physically, because emotionally she felt like pieces, shattered, scattered, slipping through her fingers. But even as the devastation pulled her under, a small, stubborn spark inside her refused to die. A whisper of strength she didn't want to lose. A whisper saying, this isn't the whole story. Her son's tense body language, his trembling hands, the panic in his eyes, those weren't signs of a cruel young man. They were signs of someone trapped, desperate. He was not proud of his actions. He wasn't even angry. He was terrified, terrified enough to run from his own mother. And suddenly she realized something. If she let him go now, if she accepted this goodbye at face value, she might lose him forever. Not because he didn't love her, but because something or someone was pulling him away. That spark inside her grew stronger. She wiped her face, stood with shaky determination, and looked toward the door. No, she couldn't stay here and crumble. She couldn't let fear freeze her. She had spent her whole life protecting him. And now, even in her aging years, she wasn't done. She took a breath, fragile but focused. She would find him. She would find out the truth, and she would fight for her son, even if he thought he had to fight alone. The night was only beginning, and the truth behind his goodbye was waiting in the dark. If you're ready for the next part, say. She stepped into the cold night, the air biting at her cheeks as though the world itself was reminding her she had no time to fall apart, no time to collapse under the weight of what her son had done or what he believed he had to do. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, stretching like thin fingers pointing in the direction he had run, and she followed their path with a trembling determination that surprised even her. She didn't bother locking the door behind her. What was the point? If her home was truly sold, it no longer belonged to her anyway. That realization struck her hard, but instead of breaking her spirit, it hardened it. With every step she took, her heartbeat sharpened, not the weak flutter of a frightened woman, but the steady drum of a mother stepping into the darkness to reclaim her child, or at least the truth. Her mind replayed the events of the past hour over and over, and each time she saw the same detail she had missed in the moment, the fear in his eyes, not anger, not cruelty, not rebellion, fear. A deep, trembling fear that made no sense for a young man who was supposedly getting married tomorrow. Weddings are supposed to bring joy, anticipation, nerves, yes, but not the kind of terror she had seen in him. She clutched her cardigan tighter around her as she walked, her mind racing ahead. If he truly sold her house, there would have been paperwork, meetings, conversations, none of which she remembered happening. And the car, her old but beloved companion, could it really be gone just like that without warning? Her son didn't have the legal right to sell either one without her signature, unless someone forged something. Unless someone pressured him into it. Unless someone convinced him he had no choice. Her pace quickened. That thought dug deeper into her chest than any pain she had felt earlier. Was he in danger? Was he entangled with people who didn't care about the lives they ruined? Or worse, was the bride's family behind this? She had never met them, not even once. Her son always avoided explaining why. He always changed the subject, claiming schedules didn't align or plans weren't finalized. Now those excuses returned to her like puzzle pieces that fit together too neatly to be ignored. She remembered the way his voice cracked when he said goodbye, the way he couldn't even look at her while saying it, a goodbye spoken with guilt, not indifference. She repeated his words silently. "I'm getting married tomorrow. I sold your car and the house. Goodbye." But what if the goodbye wasn't a goodbye at all? What if it was a warning, a plea, a desperate attempt to distance her from something he believed might harm her? That thought sent a chill down her spine. She had heard stories, elderly parents manipulated, families torn apart, young adults pressured by in-laws, scams preying on the vulnerable. She had dismissed those stories as tragedies affecting other people. Never her family. But now, in the pit of her stomach, that uneasy knot pulled tighter. She reached the edge of the street and saw the bus stop bench where her son sometimes waited when he didn't have the car. The bench was empty, but something lay on it, a crumpled piece of paper fluttering in the breeze. She walked over, her heartbeat echoing in her ears, and picked it up with trembling fingers. It was a pamphlet for a wedding venue 2 towns over, the same venue she had heard him mention once under his breath, then quickly dismiss. On the back, scribbled hastily in his handwriting, were the words, "Don't come after me." Her breath whooshed out of her chest. He knew she would follow. He expected her to follow. But if he truly wanted her to stay away, he wouldn't have left this behind like a trail. This wasn't a warning, it was a breadcrumb, a clue. Another shaky plea disguised as a rejection. Her pulse quickened. She looked up the street, then down. The road split in 2 directions, one leading to town, the other toward the highway. She closed her eyes, relying not on logic, but on the instinct that had guided her through every sick night, every heartbreak, every decision she had made raising him. Her feet moved before her mind did, toward the highway, toward the wedding venue, toward the truth. As she walked, tears welled in her eyes again, but these tears weren't fueled by weakness. They were fueled by determination. Fueled by the raw ache of a mother who refused to lose her child to secrets he should never have had to carry alone. She imagined him at that venue, standing under bright lights, surrounded by strangers, pretending to celebrate a future he looked far from ready for. She imagined him being pushed into vows he didn't want to make, perhaps by people who had something over him. She imagined him alone, afraid, and believing that the only way to protect her was to push her away entirely. And that thought made her heart ache more deeply than losing the house or the car ever could. Because a mother's greatest fear is not losing her possessions, it is losing her place in her child's life. And tonight she felt her place slipping like sand through her fingers. But as she walked, another thought sparked in her mind, one that frightened her even more. What if he wasn't the only one in danger? What if she was never meant to survive this loss at all? She shook the thought away, but it lingered stubbornly. She had heard too many stories of elders left abandoned, scammed, or worse in the name of starting fresh. But she would not let that be her story. She would not let anyone erase her existence as if her decades of sacrifice meant nothing. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, steadied her breath, and pushed forward. Tonight wasn't about houses or cars or even weddings. Tonight was about saving her son from something he was too afraid to say aloud, and she had already decided she would rather walk into danger than walk away from him. But as she approached the dimly lit sign pointing toward the venue road, a new sound pierced the quiet night, the faint murmur of raised voices drifting from a distance. Voices that sounded worried, voices that sounded familiar. Voices that made her pulse spike with both dread and urgency. Because whatever was happening up ahead, it wasn't part of any wedding celebration. It was something far worse. She followed the distant voices with cautious steps, her heart pounding so loudly she wondered if the night itself could hear it. The narrow road leading toward the wedding venue was dimly lit, lined with tall trees that cast long shadows across the pavement, and every crunch of gravel under her feet felt like a warning she was choosing to ignore. But the closer she walked, the clearer the voices became, strained, urgent, quivering with tension. Not the cheerful sounds of pre-wedding excitement, but the kind of hushed argument that signaled something was very wrong. She stepped behind a cluster of bushes near the entrance and held her breath, listening, her hands gripping the branches to steady the trembling in her fingers. She recognized her son's voice first, trembling, sharp around the edges, the way it used to sound when he lied as a little boy but didn't want to be caught. And then another voice, deep, authoritative, unfamiliar, cut through the air like a blade. "You told her," the man demanded. "You idiot, you weren't supposed to speak to her at all. Do you understand what you've done?" Her son's voice cracked. "I didn't tell her everything. I needed her not to follow me." The older woman felt her stomach twist violently. Not to follow him, so he had been lying, not to hurt her, but to keep her away from something. Something dangerous. Her breath caught painfully in her throat as the deeper voice continued, angrier this time. "We said no loose ends, no family dragging us into this. If she shows up, if she talks, the deal is off." "Deal? What deal?" She leaned in, barely daring to breathe. "I didn't tell her anything," her son whispered desperately. "I did what you said. I cut her off. I sold the car like you demanded. I signed the papers. You got the house." "Isn't that enough?" The older woman's knees nearly gave out as the truth slammed into her like a blow. He never sold her home for himself. It was taken from him. Someone had forced him, manipulated him. Someone had demanded her house. Her car, her life's work. Someone had used her son as a pawn. Before she could process it, the deeper voice replied coldly, "Enough. Don't you dare think you're in control here. You owe us. Your debts are ours now. And your little wedding tomorrow is the only way you pay them back." Her heart lurched. Debts, wedding as repayment. Her son, trapped in a marriage he didn't want to protect her. She clutched her chest, feeling her heartbeat stutter. She knew her son had been struggling financially, but she never imagined he had fallen into the hands of people who would take everything, including his freedom. Her son's voice shook as he said, "I'm doing what you're asking. Please don't involve my mother anymore." A harsh laugh followed. "Your mother is already involved," the man sneered. "We have her signature. She signed the transfer herself." Her mind raced in panic. What signature? What papers? She had never signed anything. They had forged it. They had stolen her home and used her son as the face of the crime. Her knees buckled and she braced herself against a tree, trying not to cry out. So that's why her son had looked so terrified, so hollow, because he had been forced to betray her while carrying the knowledge that men like this controlled every step he took. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and furious, not at her son, but at the hands twisting his life into something unrecognizable. She edged closer, her pulse thudding in her ears as the deeper voice added in a low threat, "If she shows up tomorrow, we'll take more than her house." "Understood," her son answered in a broken whisper, "yes," and that single word uttered from the lips of her only child made something ignite inside her. Fear, yes, but also fury, a deep maternal fury she hadn't felt in decades. Her breath trembled as she finally pieced the truth together. He hadn't abandoned her. He hadn't betrayed her. He hadn't grown cold. He had sacrificed everything to protect her from the people who now held him in their grip. His goodbye wasn't rejection, it was desperation, a last attempt to keep her safe. She bit down on her trembling lip and forced herself not to cry. Crying wouldn't save him. Crying wouldn't get her home back. Crying wouldn't stop a wedding built on threats. She needed clarity. She needed courage. She needed a plan. Her hands shook so violently she pressed them against her sides to steady them. But before she could move, another voice entered the conversation, a woman's voice this time, cold as frost. "Enough talking," she snapped. "We need him inside. The rehearsal starts in 5 minutes. If he messes up tomorrow, the money is gone." Everything is gone. The bride. The bride was part of this. The realization tore through her like a knife. Her son wasn't marrying for love. He was marrying to pay a debt that wasn't even his. A debt that had cost his mother everything. Tears blurred her vision, not from helplessness, but from heartbreak. And yet in that heartbreak, something powerful awakened inside her. She wasn't helpless. She wasn't weak. She wasn't a victim of age or circumstance. She had survived too much, fought too hard, loved too deeply to let criminals and a cold-hearted woman steal her son's future. She stepped back quietly, her breath shallow but focused as she formed a plan. She would not confront them here, not in the dark, not without proof, without help, without a strategy. She would expose them. She would reclaim her home. She would free her son from the marriage built on coercion. And she would not let tomorrow be the day they destroyed everything. But as she turned to leave, her foot snapped a twig beneath her, loud, sharp, unmistakable. The voices fell silent. Then the woman spat, "Someone's here," and the night suddenly felt far, far colder. The snap of that twig echoed through the darkness like a thunderclap, slicing through the night and freezing every voice mid-breath. She felt her stomach drop as silence swallowed the space around her. Her heart pounded violently, a desperate drum that seemed loud enough to betray her hiding place entirely. For a moment, she didn't dare move, not even to breathe, but she could feel the weight of 3 pairs of eyes scanning the shadows. Her son whispered something frantic, hurried, as if trying to convince the others that it was nothing, just an animal or the wind. But the woman, the cold voice she now recognized as the bride, wasn't convinced. "No," she hissed sharply. "Someone is here." The older woman pressed her back against the tree trunk, her fingers trembling as she tried to steady her breath. She had lived long enough to know the sound of danger creeping closer, and this sound, the purposeful crunch of footsteps approaching, was unmistakable. She wasn't imagining the threat, it was real, and it was coming straight for her. She squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, praying silently not for herself but for her son. She didn't care if they found her. She didn't care if they threatened her. What she cared about was not making this worse for him, not becoming the spark that ignited someone's violence. But before she could retreat deeper into the trees, she heard the man's voice, sharp, commanding, edged with menace, say, "You stay here. If it's her, I'll deal with it. Deal with it." Those 3 words electrified every nerve in her body. She couldn't let them find her. She couldn't let her son be punished because she overheard the truth. She crouched, breath shaking, and tried to move through the bushes as quietly as she could, but the dry leaves rustled under her shoes, betraying her with every step. The man stopped walking. "Stop hiding," he shouted. "Come out now But before he could finish his threat, her son's voice cut in, cracking with fear. "Stop, please stop. It's not her. She wouldn't be here. She wouldn't," the man snarled back. "You don't get to tell me what she would or wouldn't do. You're in too deep." She felt her heart twist painfully. Her son wasn't just being manipulated. He was trapped, suffocating under the control of people who saw him as nothing more than leverage. He hadn't just lost her home. He had lost his freedom, his choices, his voice. She darted deeper into the shadows, and in her haste, her elbow scraped against a sharp branch, tearing through her sleeve and skin. She gasped in pain, a small sound, but enough to draw the man's attention like a magnet. "There," he growled, charging toward the noise. She ducked behind a tree, her pulse racing so loudly she feared her own heartbeat would give her away. She had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed, not even when she buried her husband, not even on the lonely nights when she worried the world had forgotten her. But as she pressed herself into the darkness, something changed inside her. Fear didn't vanish, but it transformed into resolve, into the fierce, protective fire only a mother can summon. She would not let these people take her son. She would not let them destroy the last piece of family she had left. If they wanted a fight, she would give them one, but on her terms, not theirs. Just when the man came dangerously close, a sudden loud noise erupted near the parking lot, the slamming of a car door. The bride shrieked, startled, and the man spun around, distracted. She used that split second to slip away, heart pounding with both terror and relief. She crouched low, moving along the tree line until she reached a safer distance. From there, she could see the glow of the venue lights through the branches, and she saw her son standing rigid, his face pale in the artificial glow, his shoulders shaking with dread. He looked like a man sentenced to a fate he didn't choose. And then it happened, the shift she hadn't expected. Her son took a step toward the man and shouted, louder this time, more desperate than before, "Stop, she didn't follow me. She left. She doesn't know anything." "You promised I could keep her out of this." The man jabbed a finger into his chest. "And you promised you'd obey without question. You owe us, boy. You owe us everything your father didn't pay." Her breath caught her father. This debt, this nightmare, it wasn't her son's fault at all. It belonged to her late husband, the man she had loved, the man she trusted, the man she believed had left her with nothing but memories. But he had left her with something else, something poisonous, a debt she never knew existed, a chain wrapped around her son's neck. Her mind spun. If the debt was her husband's, why had she never been told? Why had her son been forced to carry it in silence? Why had no one come for it after her husband died? Why now? And then she heard the answer in the bride's voice, dripping with bitterness. "Because your husband promised my father repayment. He took help he could never return, and when he died, that debt became your son's, and you were the only asset valuable enough to claim, your house, your car, your son's obedience." The older woman felt the breath leave her body as though someone had punched her. The betrayal wasn't her son's, it was her husband's. Decades of love, shared dreams, whispered promises, and hidden beneath it all was a secret that now threatened her child. Her legs trembled beneath her, but anger steadied her spine. The kind of anger born from heartbreak and maternal protectiveness. "They think they can take everything from me," she thought, "but they don't know who I am." Her son's voice broke again, softer this time, filled with defeat. "Please, I'm begging you. Don't hurt her. I'll go through with the wedding. I'll give you everything. Just leave her out of this." And in that moment, the older woman knew the truth with painful clarity. He was ready to destroy his own life to save hers. Her son had sacrificed her home, her car, and now even his future, not because he didn't love her, but because he loved her too much. She pressed a hand over her trembling mouth, tears filling her eyes, not from weakness, but from the unbearable weight of his love. And she knew then that she couldn't run, she couldn't hide, she couldn't wait for help, she had to act, she had to protect him, because he was fighting a battle no one else would fight for him. And what she was about to do next would change everything. For a moment, she stood hidden in the shadows, her breath trembling in her chest as she watched her son crumble under the pressure of a world he never asked to be part of, a world built from the mistakes of a man she once believed was incapable of such deception. The weight of that truth pressed heavily against her heart. Her late husband, the man she loved for decades, had not only kept secrets from her, he had left their child to pay for them. The realization was painful, sharp, almost unbearable. But as she looked at her son, his shoulders slumped, his hands trembling, his voice cracking as he begged those cold-eyed people to spare her, she felt something stronger than pain rising inside her. Something fierce, something rooted deep in the bones of motherhood. She understood in that second that she could not allow his life to be sacrificed on the altar of debts he didn't choose. She couldn't let him marry into a family that saw him only as a payment plan. She couldn't let him lose his freedom, his future, or his dignity just because he had tried to protect her. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she allowed herself to breathe long, deep, steady, because she knew exactly what she had to do. She stepped out from the shadows, her voice steady even though her knees trembled. Enough, she said softly, yet her words sliced through the air like steel. Her son spun around, eyes wide, horror and fear colliding across his face. "Mom, no," he cried, but she raised her hand gently, silencing him with a look that only a mother could give. A look that said, "I've seen enough, I know everything, and I'm not afraid." The man's eyes narrowed as he stepped toward her, but she stood her ground, her chin lifting with a quiet strength she didn't even know she still possessed. "You wanted me," she said. "Well, here I am, but you will not touch my son." Her voice didn't rise, it didn't shake. It simply existed with the authority of someone who had lived long enough to understand what real danger was and how to stare it down. The bride scoffed, arms crossed, venom in her eyes. "You can't stop this wedding," she spat. "This debt is real. Your husband owed us everything." The older woman met her gaze with a calmness that unsettled the younger woman. "My husband may have owed you," she said, "but my son does not." She took a slow step forward. "And neither do I," the man laughed coldly. "You don't decide that," but she shook her head gently. "Actually, I do." And with that, she reached into her cardigan pocket, pulling out something that made their faces pale, a small, worn notebook. The man's expression twisted with shock and recognition. "Where did you get that?" he snapped. Her son stared, stunned, as his mother held the notebook up to the dim light. "Your father gave this to me," she said softly to her son. "Years ago, he said it contained every financial record he didn't want to forget. I never understood why he hid it from you. I never knew what it meant." She turned toward the man again, her voice sharpening. "Until tonight." Inside the notebook, tucked behind old receipts and notes, was a signed agreement, dated, notarized, and long expired. An agreement showing that the debt her husband owed had been paid off years before his death. Every cent, every obligation, every tie severed. The bride's face went white, the man's lips twisted. That's not valid," he stammered, but she cut him off. "It's very valid. I called the notary the year he passed away." Her hand trembled slightly. "She told me he had completed every requirement. But I never understood its importance until now." She stepped even closer. "So let me make something perfectly clear. You have no claim over my son. You have no claim over me. And you have no right to steal what my family built." Her son stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. The weak, trembling young man who had earlier begged for mercy suddenly straightened, hope breaking through the despair etched across his face. He turned toward the man. "It's over," he said, voice strengthening with every syllable. "You've been lying to me." The man's jaw clenched. The bride grabbed his arm, whispering frantically. Panic rippled through their little group like a fire consuming dry grass, but the older woman didn't take her eyes off them. "Leave," she said firmly. "Tonight, before I show this to the authorities." She stepped forward with the notebook, and the man flinched. Flinched, the kind of flinch that reveals guilt and fear in equal measure. He cursed under his breath, then grabbed the bride's arm and hissed, "Let's go." They fled, disappearing into the night like cowards scattering when the light finally reaches them. The silence that followed was thick, emotional, almost sacred. Her son let out a shaky breath, part relief, part collapse, and covered his face with his hands. She walked to him slowly, gently prying his hands away, revealing the tears he had tried to hide all night. "Mom," he whispered, voice cracking, "I'm so sorry. I tried to protect you. I didn't know what else to do." She cupped his face with both hands, her own tears spilling freely. "You did protect me," she whispered. "You just forgot that I can protect you too." She pulled him into her arms, holding him as she once did when he was small and frightened and unsure of the world. And for the first time that night, he let himself break, not into pieces, but into truth. He held her as though he'd been drowning, and she was the air he hadn't realized he needed. They stood like that until the fear seeped out of both of them. And then he whispered, "What do we do now?" She smiled through her tears. "We go home," she said gently. "It's still ours." And as they began walking back together, mother and son, hearts shaken but unbroken, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not youth, not strength, but purpose. A purpose that whispered through her chest with quiet certainty. Sometimes the goodbye you fear is really the beginning of the truth you needed all along. But little did she know someone else had heard everything. And their next step would bring a new truth neither of them expected. As the night slowly gave way to a softer silence and the weight of fear began to loosen its grip on her heart, she walked beside her son with a steadiness neither of them had felt when the evening began. The truth had shaken them, yes, but it also stitched something back together, something they didn't even realize had started to unravel long ago. And as she held onto the warmth of his hand, she couldn't help but think about how fragile family ties can feel at times, how easily misunderstandings, secrets, and fear can twist love into something unrecognizable. But she also knew something deeply comforting. Even broken moments can become bridges when courage takes the first step. And maybe you, listening to this, know that feeling too, the heaviness of being hurt by someone you love deeply, only to later discover the pain came not from cruelty, but from fear, pressure, or burdens you never knew they carried. So before you go, I want to ask you gently, softly, in a way that makes room for your heart, have you ever felt betrayed by someone close, only to learn later that the truth was far more complicated and that their actions came from desperation rather than lack of love? If you feel comfortable, share a little of your story in the comments. You never know, your words might be the comfort someone else needs tonight.